So welcome back to Study Through the Bible, and we are going to be in Numbers 15 and 16 with a little addition from the book of Jude today. And if you're new here, go ahead and click that subscribe button so you don't miss any future content where we study the Bible in community here on YouTube. And we do that through the daily study assignments that you find in the description down below. And we can do that through these weekly study videos where I give my insights into the text from that previous week. And then if there's any insights or questions that you have, feel free to put those in the comments down below. And I'll be choosing some of those for next week's Q&A. And so we're going to be dealing with the infamous passage dealing with Korah's rebellion today. And we find that in Numbers 15 and 16. And so let's go ahead and jump right in. All right, so the first thing that we find there is Numbers 15:18. Speak unto the children of Israel and say unto them, when you come into the land where I bring you. Now, this really struck me because God immediately starts talking to them about when I bring you into the land that I promised you. And this stuck out to me because last week we talked about the infamous passage in which the children of Israel sent 12 spies into the land. Then 10 of them came back complaining and whining and saying, we're like grasshoppers in their sight. There's no way in the world we're going to defeat them. And then Caleb and Joshua, the two faithful spies, say, no, it doesn't matter. Yes, there's giants in the land. There's fallen ones. There's Nephilim. But it doesn't matter because God has promised us this land, and He's made these promises to our forefathers, and He's going to be with us, and that's all we need. And so they chose to go with the 10 spies and their report, and they rebelled. And so God says that this whole generation is going to die off in the wilderness except for Joshua and Caleb, because they were the only ones who are faithful to me. It's your children who you were so worried about, saying like, oh, our children are going to get killed when we go in because of these people. He says they are going to be the ones who inherit the land. You guys are going to wander around in the wilderness for 40 years until you guys all die off, and then I'm going to take them into the land. And so it's interesting to me that immediately after that passage, after he's laid down the consequences and he's saying, like, hey, I forgive you, but there's consequences. Now he immediately goes into language, when you come into the land where I bring you. And knowing that it's a large percentage at this point of people who are not going to go in. But he's still speaking to them as his people collectively, saying, when I bring you into the promised land, you're still on a mission together. You're still my people. You're still accomplishing a great thing, even if it's for the future. And sometimes we lose sight of that. It's not if anymore. It's not a conditional thing, and we so often want to make our relationship with God a conditional thing. If I do this, then He will do this. If I don't do this, then He won't do this. And that's not the way it works. These are a series of opportunities that we have. They had an awesome opportunity. God was going to bring them into the promised land, but now He's not, and He's waiting. He's patient. He's got time. We don't. He lives in eternity. We don't. And so when we fail to abide in His promises and trust Him and receive the things that He has for us, we're the ones who miss out, not Him. But it's still when. He's still going to bring them into the promised land. They're still His people, and they're going to die in the wilderness physically, but spiritually they still have the ability to go into the ultimate promised land of heaven when they die and to be with Jesus. And so I think that's really important to see, that we're not talking about salvation here, we're talking about inheritance. And this has a lot of important lessons for us to learn in regards to us as New Testament believers, that we've been saved, and He has a lot of stuff for us. But we can abstain from our reward, like Jesus said to the Pharisees, and we can have it stolen from us, and we can have it, we can lose it, our inheritance, our crown, our, not our salvation. Numbers 15:32. And while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man that gathered sticks upon the Sabbath day. And the Lord said unto Moses, the man shall be surely put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp. Now, when I was looking for images that had to do with this, I noticed that a lot of them were associated with sites that, atheists love this kind of stuff in the Bible, because they love to pull it out as an isolated thing and say, is this the kind of God that you would want to worship? That, a guy's out there gathering sticks and he gets put to death because he's gathering sticks. Is that, how ridiculous is that? And they love to rip, passages, verses out of their context of the whole. They love to just take isolated incidents and not really talk about what it is that's going on here. And so it is on the Sabbath. The Sabbath was a sign of the covenant that God made with Israel. Okay, so, and we saw how seriously God took the Sabbath earlier when we were talking about the Sabbath of the land, and that's ultimately the reason why they went into exile in Babylon for 70 years, because they didn't keep that for 490 years. God says, you owe me 70. Okay, this is a matter of purity and keeping his people with a specific identity that is interconnected with him. Okay, and this guy, it seems like he's doing something just haphazard or, not that big of a deal, but he knew what he was doing. He knew it was the Sabbath, and he knew he was intentionally violating God's commands, and he was doing it blatantly, publicly, for everyone to see. And so you can look at it from that perspective. And really, this is a symptom of a larger issue, in that we think of sins as like, oh my gosh, he murdered somebody, or, certain sexual sins, and we think like, oh my gosh, those are the really, really big deal sins. If you commit those, I don't even know if God can forgive you. And we tend to think of that, and then we think of our sins, like gossip and division and, lying and those kind of things, swearing. Those kind of sins we take not so seriously. We think those are small sins, and then what this guy did over here is big sin. And these kind of passages remind us that God doesn't see it that way. Sin is sin. There are no small sins and big sins. Reminds me of that Seinfeld scene where, there's no small coincidences and big coincidences. There's just coincidences. There is no small sins. There's no big sins. When you look through God's eyes, it's only when you look through our eyes that we look at the consequences of sins, and we say, oh, I really don't like the consequences of that, so I'm really going to stay away from that, because if I get caught doing that, then it's going to be really bad for me. But when we look at, like I said, the things that we are prone to do, those are small sins. Those are things that we've decided that it's worth the cost to do it, to continue to do it. And we look at it that way. God doesn't look at it that way. He sees sin. And sin separates us from him. The wages of sin is death, spiritual, physical, relational, all of it. And and sin cost him the life of his son. Jesus died for our sin. He became sin and died for it. And so from God's eyes, there is no small sins. And so this guy, he's picking up sticks on the Sabbath. Whether he's picking up sins in the Sabbath, or we see the event that we're going to get to in a second that has to do with Korah and his group, sin is sin. Numbers 15:38, speak unto the children of Israel, and bid them that they make them fringes on the borders of their garments throughout their generations, that they put upon the fringe of the borders a ribbon of blue, and it shall be upon you for a fringe, that you may look upon it, and remember all the commandments of the Lord, and do them, and that you seek not after your own heart and your own eyes, after which you used to go following after. Okay? So, this is, if you've ever seen a Jewish person, especially like an Orthodox Jew, walking around, and he has this white, thing that has blue stripes and what you see on the screen. Basically, it has the fringe on it, and you wonder what in the world is that. That's called a prayer shawl, and that is how the Jewish people took this command and then ran with it. And this is the design that they came up with, and it has 613 tassels all the way around, and there's 613 laws. And so literally they were saying on your clothing you're going to always have these 613 tassels on the shawl that are going to help you to remember. And a good Jewish person would then touch one of the tassels, and it would be a way of remembering the Torah. It would be a way of praying through the Torah, and to make sure that they were remembering it, keeping it, not violating it. And so this is a great reminder for us. We're not under the law. We don't have to remember the 613 commands and, be tedious about obeying them. We don't have to wear specific things on our clothing. But what is it that would help you remember to pray? What would it be to help you remember God's word? What would it be to remember God's faithfulness in your life? And, that stop reminder, oh, I haven't prayed for the people that God's placed in my life, that they would come to Christ today. I haven't prayed for the people in my church that are going through some hard stuff, today. I haven't prayed for my family today. I haven't prayed for myself today. I haven't, meditated on the scriptures, today. So what would it take for you to be able to remember? One of the things that I've constantly thrown out in relation to the people that God has placed in our life, if you don't know who they are, go to God, ask Him, take a piece of pen, paper, and write their names down. He will give it to you. He will tell you who are the people that are unsaved, don't have a relationship with Him, that they have a relationship with you. Whether you've pursued it, or they just happen to be the neighbor that you never talk to, or the person you sit next to in class or at work every single day, or even in church, the person you sit next to. Who are those people that God's put in your life? He will let you know. He'll bring them to your heart, in your mind, and write them down. Write their names down. Put it on a Post-it. Slap it on the bathroom mirror, or in your bedroom, someplace where you're going to see it often, and it's going to be a reminder. Hey, pray for these people. Think about these people. Build relationships with these people, and look for what God's going to do in your life. Now, you can do that with other things that you are called to pray for. And so I would encourage you to do that. Numbers 16:1. Now Korah rose up before Moses with 250 princes of the assembly, and they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron, and said unto them, You take too much upon you, seeing all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you lift yourselves up above the congregation of the Lord? And when Moses heard it, he fell upon his face. So here we have another instance, just like we had, the congregation as a whole, and then we had the incidents with Aaron and Miriam, and they're coming and complaining against Moses, and Moses even complaining. We saw that last week. Now we have these individuals who are part of they're part of the Levites, okay? And so they're servants within the tabernacle. They have different roles that they're playing. Okay, so Moses and Aaron, if you didn't know, they're from the tribe of Levi, right? And so these guys are thinking, okay, the congregation as a whole are God's people. They're holy. They're set apart for God's purpose and His plan. And we, as the Levites, have been all called to serve God specifically within the tabernacle, and to offer sacrifices and stand on behalf of the people and play our different roles. Why is it that you, Aaron and Moses, why is it that you guys set yourself apart as we're special, we're the ones who talk with God, we're the ones who tell you what to do, we're the leaders, we decipher, we tell you what God is saying. and deliver God's word to you. Why do you do that? And they are enunciating something that our culture really needs to understand. And that is that equality has nothing to do with role. These guys are looking at their role versus Moses and Aaron's role. Moses and Aaron were the leaders. They're the ones who get to speak with God. They're the ones who call to be prophets, just like the Levites happen to be the ones that now, through the course of events that we've talked about, they're the ones who are serving God in the tabernacle versus all the other 11, tribes of Israel. And so their argument is we're all God's people, and he's working in all of our lives, and his desire is to save every one of us. So what makes you two special? And his argument is flawed in thinking that because not everybody gets to do with what Moses and Aaron do, or have the role that Moses and Aaron have, that means that everybody's not equal. Everybody's not special. Everybody's not unique. And that's exactly what our culture believes when it comes to, men and women, when it comes to, different, opportunities that, maybe one person has that another person doesn't have. Certain giftings, certain abilities, certain experience, certain financial ramifications, certain educational ramifications. We look at it in today's world as if I'm not able to do exactly the same job as that person, then I must not be equal. I must be inferior to them. And that's not the way that God has seen that all along. From the beginning, he's created us unique, diverse, with different gifts and a different role to play. And different and diverse does not mean unequal. And differentiation of role, not everybody's called to be the leader. Not everybody's called to be the teacher. Not everybody's called to be the encourager. Not everybody's called to, be the evangelist. Paul says one person waters, one person, sows the seed. God gives the increase. So we really need to embrace this, that the role that God has us playing isn't any less significant than the role that anybody else is playing. And if we are a leader, whether we're a leader or we're a follower, we're called to do what God has called us to do. Whether we win thousands to Christ, or we win one to Christ, or we don't have the privilege of ever actually experience somebody coming across the finish line of faith, it doesn't make any less of us significant if you are following the Spirit's leading and you're serving and you're using your gifts and you're out there praying for those people and you're out there sowing seeds and you're trying, you're doing what God has called you to do. Then don't worry about what the other person is doing or not doing, or what you get to do or don't get to do. Don't worry about that. Keep doing what God has you doing and let him sort out everything. Numbers 16:5. And he spake unto Korah and unto all his company, saying, Even tomorrow the Lord will show who are his, and who is holy, and will cause him to come near unto him, even him whom he has chosen will he cause to come near unto him. This do, take you censers, Korah and all his company, and put fire therein, and put incense in them before the Lord. Tomorrow, and it shall be that the man whom the Lord chooses, he shall be holy. You take too much upon you, you sons of Levi. And so I find it interesting the way that the wording of this just throws back at him the specific accusations and throws them right back. He says, here's what God says, he will show us who is holy. Since Korah came and he says, since every one of us is holy, we should all be able to do the same thing. And God says, I will show you who is holy. And then later on, he says, you take too much upon you, sons of Levi. And that's the other accusation. You guys take too much upon yourselves, and you don't let us participate. You don't let us, do what you guys get to do. Okay? So that was the response. And here is the reality. From Genesis all the way to Revelation, literally from the creation story, who is the one who is able to look at creation and say, it is good? God. He is the one who determines, he is the one who dictates, he is the one who gets to play God. He is the one, by his word, can declare something good, can declare something holy. And that is, from Genesis to Revelation, the very thing that he has done, is he has declared what is good and what is holy. And here's another instance in which he says, don't call yourself holy. You can't say, I'm holy, and make yourself holy. God can say you are holy and make you holy. And he does that through the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Jesus took our sin. He who knew no sin became sin so that we might become the righteousness of God. So that we might become the righteousness of God. Jesus said there's good trees and there's bad trees. And a good tree doesn't bear bad fruit. A bad tree doesn't bear good fruit. Why do you call me good? Jesus says. There is only one good, and he is God. Why do you call me good? That's what he's basically saying to Korah. Why do you call yourself and these other people holy? I will show you who is holy. Numbers 16:8, and Moses said, seem it but a small thing unto you that the God of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself, to do the service of the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the congregation to minister unto them. And he has brought you near to him, and all your brethren, the sons of Levi, with you, and seek you the priesthood also. So Moses is saying, your whole thing is based upon the premise that we should be able to do what you do. And Moses says, no, that's not. God has called you to do a specific thing. And if you aren't doing that thing, then there's nobody doing that thing. Just like if I were not doing my thing, then there would be nobody doing my thing. Okay, so he says every person has its part, and you're the one who is making the error in saying that what I do is more important than what you do. Okay, Moses isn't the one who's coming with that mentality. He's not the one lording it over the people. He's not the one who is making them feel small and him big. He's the one who is saying, we saw him say when other people were prophesying, he says, that's awesome. I wish that all God's people would prophesy. And even when they brought this accusation, he falls on his face. There is a lot of great characteristics that we are seeing in Moses. He has his moments where he fails and he falls flat on his face, but we all have those moments. But Moses is bringing up something that sometimes we feel. Is it a small thing to you that the God of Israel has separated you? Read that, from the world. Separated you from the world and from the people of God to do this specific thing for his service and for the service of his people. Do you consider that a small thing? And the truth of the matter is, sometimes we do. Sometimes we look at all that God has given us, all that God has done for us, all that God is doing through us, and we think, but I want to do something else. And, or we get too caught up in, the pleasures of this world, and we think that that's where our joy is, that's where our identity is, that's where we're going to find significance, over there. And he says, is it a small thing that the God of the universe has forgiven you, has sanctified you, has given you his Holy Spirit and given you gifts to serve his body, and he's given you people, he's prepared good works in advance for you to do? Is it a small thing? Numbers 16:12, and Moses sent to call Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, which said, we will not come up. Is it a small thing that you have brought us up out of the land that flows with milk and honey? So now they're throwing it back at Moses, right? His own words, they're throwing it back. Well, is it a small thing that you have brought us up out of a land that flows with milk and honey? Notice that language. He is saying, you brought us from a land flowing with milk and honey. He's talking about Egypt. You brought us from a place of prosperity and a place of flowing with milk and honey. That's the description God gave. I'm going to bring you to a land flowing with milk and honey. He's talking about the promised land. God is. And now Dathan and Abiram, they come and say, you brought us out of that. They were slaves in Egypt. And we talked about that, how we remember things wrong, how we fail to realize the bondage of our sin. And this is such a blatant, this is another instance in which they are questioning the goodness of God. They are questioning the salvation of God. They're looking at what he brought them out of and saying that was the good life. And we saw last week how God does not take very kindly to that. And so you brought us up out of that to kill us in the wilderness, except you make yourself altogether a prince over us. Moreover, you have not brought us into a land that flows with milk and honey, or given us inheritance of fields and vineyards. Will you put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up. So they are standing in blatant defiance over the man that God has put in leadership over them. And they are spitting in the eye of God by saying that thing that you called us out of and you brought us out of, that was the good thing. This is miserable. This is where you brought us out here to die. And they're bitter over the consequences. Okay, we talked about last week, the verdict is given by God. All of you who sided with the 10 spies and said, we can't do this, we can't go into the promised land, they have abstained from their reward. And God says, I'm going to let you have what you want. You don't want to go into the promised land? You don't have to go into the promised land. In fact, you're not going into the promised land. And by the way, that includes Moses and Aaron. We saw that last week. That includes it. So everybody in this whole conversation here is in the same camp. Joshua and Caleb are the only ones from that generation who are going into the promised land. And so, now they're just bitter. We saw them. They defied God. They went up to battle. Anyway, they got routed. And now, they're starting all these rebellions. And they're saying well, since I can't go over there, I want to be able to do this. And how dare you think you're better than me, Moses, and all that kind of, I'm not going to listen to you. You don't know what you're doing. We're going to die here. I wish we could just go back there, right? Bitter over the consequences. Numbers 16:26, and he spake unto the congregation, saying, depart, I pray you, from the tents of these wicked men, and touch nothing of theirs, lest you be consumed in all their sins. If the Lord make a new thing, and the earth open her mouth and swallow them up, then all that appertain unto them, and they go down quick into Sheol, then you shall understand that these men have provoked the Lord, and the earth opened up her mouth and swallowed them up, and their houses, and all the men that appertained unto Korah, and all their goods, they and all that appertained unto them went down alive into Sheol, and the earth closed upon them, and they perished from among the congregation. Whoa. So God says, here's what's going to happen to, separate yourself from these guys because I'm going to deal with them. Now, here's the thing. I want you to imagine, because this is exactly what happens, okay? The earth literally opens up, they go down, and then the earth goes and closes back up over them. Talk about being buried alive. And the language here is that they're going down to Sheol. Now, a lot of people take that and they run with it and they say Sheol must be in the middle of the earth. And there are a lot of passages that seem to almost suggest that or imply that. And I don't know, honestly, what to tell you about whether or not that's exactly what the Bible is suggesting or whether that's actually the physical location. But the bottom line, yes, they physically went into the earth, but that doesn't necessarily equate it with Sheol. They died. God killed them. So where do dead people go? They go to Sheol. Sheol, Hades, the land of the dead, the realm of the dead. Okay, whatever you want to call that. Okay, so that's where they went. Now, imagine this. Imagine that God says, separate yourself from them. And there's some who don't. I wonder if there were. It doesn't say, but I wonder if there were. I wonder if there are people who are like, no, what you're doing is wrong, Moses. And they're siding with Korah, right? Or they're just like passive, like, okay, whatever, like separate from them. But they're my friends, I'm not gonna go separate. I'm not gonna shun them, right? And I wonder if there were. Think about it. God says, do it. Separate from them. I'm going to deal with them. If they didn't separate from them, they were going to go down with them. There are times, and people give groups a really hard time that practice shunning. Okay, now shunning, the way that it's done, I agree that it's not a good thing. Okay, it's emotional manipulation that's done for the purpose of trying to mess with that person and make them feel like they have to come back to the group. When it says treat them as you would an unbeliever, you don't shun unbelievers. Like we're told to preach the gospel with them, build relationships with them, and for the sake of the gospel. And so you would do the same thing for somebody. You can send a message that, hey, I'm not okay with what you're doing. And, because you're toxic to the group, we can't let you fellowship with us or participate in worship. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to stop, trying to reach out to you and get through to you and all of those things. Okay. But where I was going with this is that there is a point in which a person is choosing to go down the road they are going, which is in complete and direct defiance of God. And the Bible is very clear that if that's the case, then we shouldn't be in close fellowship with them. We shouldn't be encouraging them or tolerating, as our culture would say. Okay, or just, sweeping it under the rug, ignoring it, just continuing to let them do what they're doing, okay? These guys were causing division within the people of God. God does not take kindly to that, and we see that that's obviously the case. They were unrepentant and causing blatant division, and they were completely uncontent with what God had done for them in bringing them out of Egypt, and not willing to deal with the consequences of their own actions and their own choices to not take advantage of what God wanted for them and to go into the promised land. They refused. They were scared. They refused, and they rebelled. And then God laid down the consequences, and then they're bitter over the consequences. And so God says, separate from them. Get away from them. Don't deal with them. And all throughout this, we've been seeing if they're doing certain things, get them out of the camp. Cast them out of the camp or stone them. Just get rid of them. Okay? While they are in that state, don't let them poison the whole. Separate from them. And sometimes, and you got to discern the spirit when God's calling you to separate from somebody, because otherwise you're going to go down in the ditch with them, right? Two blind men going to lead each other into a ditch. I wonder if that's what Jesus was actually referring to. Actually, that's kind of interesting. Love to hear what your thoughts are on that. Number 1641. But on the next day, all the congregation and the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron, saying, You have killed the people of the Lord. And it came to pass when the congregation was gathered against Moses and against Aaron, and they looked toward the tabernacle of the congregation, and behold, a cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. And Aaron took as Moses commanded, and ran into the midst of the congregation, and behold, the plague was begun among the people, and he put on incense and made an atonement for the people, and he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stayed. This is an amazing model for me of what Jesus has done for us. The next day, okay, how quickly we forget. So the next day, the people rise up against Moses and Aaron, saying, You have killed God's people. And they're unhappy about it. Now, I mean, I don't even know what in the world they would be thinking. I mean, did Moses and Aaron stage that whole, like, ground swallowing up the living thing? I mean, but that's that. How quickly we forget how prone we are to wander, how prone we are to falling back into our sins and return to our vomit, as Scripture says, right? So Moses and Aaron, their response, their reaction to this is they go immediately into action, and they say, Aaron, get into the tabernacle and put incense on there and start pleading with God on their behalf that he not do what he did yesterday, right? And so there was a plague that God already sent among the people. He's like, you know what? Hey, if I have to speed up this whole killing this generation off in the wilderness thing, I'm all for it. I mean, he seems like he is really like, you know what? My plan is completely on hold because of my patience for you guys. If you're going to test my patience, you're going to try me and intentionally rebel against me, then I have no problem speeding this process up. And so, he sends a plague. And so Moses and Aaron, they atone for the people and stand on their behalf. And it says he literally stands between the dead and the living. Man, that is a perfect illustration. That in Romans 5, the Apostle Paul says, while we were yet helpless, while we were yet powerless, while we were yet sinners, while we were yet God's enemies, Christ died for us. And that's exactly, their complaint that caused the plague was against Moses and Aaron. They've been just heaping abuse upon them and just putting them through incredible stress and everything else. And Moses and Aaron stand in between them and God on their behalf. And what an amazing picture that is of what Jesus has done for us. Jude 1:10, but these speak evil of those things which they know not, speaking about the false prophets that were around in Jude's time. But what they know naturally is brute beast, in those things they corrupt themselves. Woe unto them, for they have gone in the way of Cain, and ran greedily after the error of Balaam for reward, and perished in the division brought by Korah. So Jude informs us, and he looks back on this and other events in the book of Numbers and the book of Genesis, and he says these false prophets, they're no different than those guys way back when that we read about, in which God dealt with them very swiftly, harshly. He didn't have toleration for it. If you cause division within his family, God takes that very seriously. He doesn't deal with it lightly. That's probably one of the things that he hates more than anything. And so, if you are one who is prone to gossip, prone to bring brother against brother, prone to cause disunity and disharmony within the church of God, within the people of God, then stop it. Just stop it, because God does not deal lightly. He does not take kindly to that kind of behavior. And so, how is God calling you to grow? Is he calling you to trust his promises, see sin the way that he does, see equality the way he does, see holiness the way he does? Is he calling you to remember to pray, have contentment with your role, deal with bitterness in your life, God honoring relationships, or seeking peace? And so, I invite you, as I did before, to subscribe to the channel. And if you're ready to go on to the next video, look right around here or down below, and there's some playlists that you can join up on. And so, if you have insights or comments, questions that I did not cover, put them in the comments down below. I'll be looking back to see what you guys have to say. And I really just want to invite you into community here on YouTube as we study the Bible together. And until next time, may God's grace be with you.